Hello, my friend. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Think about the last time you sat down to do something that actually mattered. A project you'd been putting off, a conversation you kept avoiding, a habit you swore you'd start this week, or that one goal you've been carrying around for longer than you'd like to admit. What happened? If you're honest with yourself, and I mean really honest, your brain found a way out. Maybe you checked your phone. Maybe you convinced yourself you'd feel more ready tomorrow. Maybe you opened 17 browser tabs, told yourself you were being productive, and somehow ended up watching videos about topics you don't even care about at midnight. This is not a character flaw. This is not laziness. This is not a sign that you're broken or weak, or that success simply isn't meant for someone like you. This is biology doing exactly what it was designed to do. And here's what nobody tells you. The most accomplished people you admire, the ones who seem to have an endless engine of discipline, they feel the exact same resistance you do. The same gravitational pull toward comfort, the same quiet voice that says, not now, maybe later, not today. The difference isn't that they feel less resistance. The difference is they've figured out how to move anyway, not through white-knuckled willpower, not through a motivational speech they replay every morning, not through some genetic advantage that skipped you, through systems, through understanding how the brain actually operates, and then building a life that works with that brain instead of constantly fighting against it. You're not here to feel inspired for 20 minutes and then slide back into the same patterns by Thursday. You're here because some part of you already knows what you're capable of and is exhausted from watching yourself fall short of it. By the time we finish, you won't just understand why your brain resists hard things. You'll have a complete, practical operating manual for forcing it to do them anyway, consistently, automatically, and without burning yourself into the ground in the process. Because here's the truth underneath everything. Everything you actually want is on the other side of hard things. The question isn't whether you're capable of getting there. The question is whether you're ready to stop letting your brain talk you out of it. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Willpower Lie, the Biology of Resistance, and Why Smart People Stay Stuck. The story you've been sold. You've been living inside a story. It goes something like this. Some people are simply built differently. They wake up energized. They push through discomfort without breaking a sweat. They don't procrastinate, don't avoid, don't negotiate with themselves. They have discipline hardwired into them. And if you don't have it, well, maybe you're just not one of those people. If you've ever believed that story, even quietly, in the back of your mind, I need you to hear this clearly. That story is false. Completely, provably, scientifically false. And believing it has been one of the most expensive mistakes of your life. Willpower is not a personality trait. It's not a character virtue that some people are born with and others aren't. It's not the secret ingredient separating the top performers from everyone else. Willpower is a resource. It's finite. It depletes. And it gets drained by every single decision you make. From what to eat for breakfast, to how to respond to a difficult email, to whether to stop at the grocery store on the way home. Every single decision. Here's what a willpower-dependent day actually looks like for someone in your season of life. You wake up with a full tank. You resist scrolling before your feet hit the floor. You make a healthy breakfast instead of the easy one. You navigate morning chaos, kids' commute, calendar conflicts, the 3 urgent messages that arrived before 9 a.m. You make dozens of micro decisions before noon. What to prioritize, what to delegate, what to say in that meeting, how to handle the colleague who's driving you crazy without burning a bridge. By mid-afternoon, you're not tired because you lack discipline. You're tired because your brain has been spending mental fuel since the moment you opened your eyes. And that's when it starts. The snack you didn't plan for becomes irresistible. The workout you scheduled gets quietly moved to tomorrow. The important project you were going to tackle after dinner never gets opened. You tell yourself it'll be different tomorrow. And tomorrow, the whole cycle repeats. This is decision fatigue. And it's not a motivational problem. It's a neurological one. Researchers have documented it extensively. Judges give harsher sentences later in the day. Doctors make riskier prescriptions by evening. Investors make worse decisions after lunch. The mental energy required for good decision-making is real, limited, and exhaustible. When that energy runs out, your brain doesn't pause and wait. It defaults immediately to whatever is most automatic, most familiar, and least effortful, which, if you haven't intentionally designed your life otherwise, is usually the comfortable, easy, short-term choice. What highly disciplined people actually do differently. Here's the insight that changes everything. The people who seem to operate with unlimited discipline aren't fighting harder battles than you. They're fighting fewer battles. They've systematically eliminated the decisions that drain willpower. So when something genuinely difficult comes up, they still have fuel in the tank. They don't ask themselves, "Should I work out today?" Because that question was answered last Sunday when they scheduled it like a non-negotiable appointment. They don't negotiate with themselves about eating well at 8 p.m. because the temptation was never stocked in the kitchen to begin with. They don't debate whether to start their most important work first, because their environment was designed to make that the only obvious option when they sit down. The decision has already been made. The brain doesn't burn energy on it. It simply executes. This is the single most important shift you need to make, and I want it to land fully before we move on. Stop trying to build more willpower. Start building systems that make willpower irrelevant. This isn't a small tweak. This is a fundamental redesign of how you operate. And it matters even more for you, because at this stage of your life, your cognitive load is real and substantial. You're not a 22-year-old with a single focus and no obligations. You have a career with real stakes, relationships that require real investment, financial responsibilities, health concerns, a social life, a family perhaps, a version of yourself you're still trying to figure out. You have more demands on your mental bandwidth than you've ever had, which means relying on willpower isn't just ineffective. It's especially, predictably, structurally ineffective for your life. You need a smarter approach, not a harder one. The 2 systems running your life. Your brain operates on 2 systems that are constantly in tension. System 1 is fast, automatic, and emotional. This is the system that makes you reach for your phone when a notification sounds. Pour a second glass of wine when you said you'd stop at one. Snap back at someone when you're depleted. And default to Netflix when you meant to work on something that actually matters. It operates without conscious effort. It never gets tired. It processes information roughly 10 million times faster than conscious thought. And here's the sobering part. It's been running the show for most of your life. System 2 is slow, deliberate, and rational. This is the system that sets goals, makes plans, thinks long-term, and knows exactly what you should be doing. It's the part of you reading these words right now, nodding along, taking notes. But System 2 has a critical weakness. It runs on limited fuel. It requires actual metabolic energy to operate. It gets exhausted. And when it tires, System 1 fills every gap automatically. Most self-improvement advice essentially tells you to use System 2 to overpower System 1. Think harder. Try harder. Resist more. Be more disciplined. That's not a strategy. That's a guarantee of eventual failure, because you're asking the weaker, more exhaustible system to constantly defeat the stronger, infinitely tireless one. The winning move is to stop fighting System 1 and start programming it. Your automatic system is incredibly powerful. The question isn't how to shut it down. The question is how to aim it at the right targets. And you do that through habits, through environments, through systems that make the behavior you want the behavior that happens automatically, without System 2 needing to intervene. Why your brain resists hard things, and it's not what you think. Here's something your biology textbooks didn't mention clearly enough. Your brain was not designed for your success. It was designed for your survival. And there is a profound critical difference between those two things. For hundreds of thousands of years, human survival depended on a very specific set of priorities. Avoid unnecessary risk, conserve energy wherever possible, stay close to what's familiar, and never venture too far from safety. The humans who were cautious, comfort-seeking, and resistant to change were statistically more likely to survive. They passed on their genes. Their operating system became your operating system. What this means, practically, is that every time you try to do something difficult, new, or growth-oriented, your brain interprets it at a deep biological level as a potential threat, not a philosophical threat, a survival threat, and it responds accordingly. But here's what makes this particularly insidious. The resistance doesn't feel like fear. It feels like perfectly reasonable, logical thinking. It feels like, I'm too tired for this right now. It feels like, this isn't the right time. I'll be in a better headspace next week. It feels like, I should probably do more research before I start. It feels like, I'll begin fresh on Monday. Your brain has become extraordinarily sophisticated at generating rational-sounding reasons for avoiding anything uncomfortable or uncertain, and because they sound reasonable, you often believe them. You act on them, and you end up exactly where you started. Here's what's actually happening beneath the surface. The moment you even think about doing something genuinely challenging, the amygdala, your brain's threat detection alarm, begins scanning for danger. It doesn't matter that starting that business will change your life. It doesn't matter that having that difficult conversation will strengthen your most important relationship. It doesn't matter that the hard workout will make you healthier, stronger, and more confident. Your amygdala doesn't evaluate the merit of the activity. It evaluates the familiarity of it, and unfamiliar equals dangerous. When the alarm triggers, your body responds with stress hormones. Your heart rate increases. Your breathing shallows. Every instinct pulls you toward retreat and safety. Meanwhile, your prefrontal cortex, the rational, goal-oriented part, tries to override the alarm. But this is an unequal fight. The amygdala is faster, more automatic, and operates without any energy cost. The prefrontal cortex is slower, requires enormous energy, and gets exhausted quickly. In a direct battle between reason and threat response, the threat response wins almost every time, especially when you're already tired, stressed, or overwhelmed. This is why you can know exactly what to do, know why you should do it, know how to do it, and still find yourself unable to take action. It's not a knowledge problem. It's not a motivation problem. It's a neurological conflict playing out below the level of conscious awareness. The anticipatory trap. There's one more layer to this that makes it even more powerful. Your brain doesn't just resist hard things in the moment, it learns to predict when hard things are coming and creates resistance in advance. This is why you feel a vague dread on Sunday evening, even when Monday is still 18 hours away. This is why you feel anxious about a presentation days before you have to give it. This is why certain goals, the ones that would genuinely change your life, feel heavy and exhausting to even think about. Your brain has been training you to avoid challenging situations by making you feel bad just thinking about them. It's preemptive self-protection, and it operates completely below conscious awareness. You're not choosing to feel resistant about your goals. These feelings arise automatically because your brain has spent years, maybe decades, associating challenge with discomfort, effort with pain, and ambition with risk. The good news, and there is very good news here, is that this is all learned programming, and learned programming can be unlearned and replaced. Your brain's neuroplasticity, its documented, proven ability to form new neural connections throughout your entire life, means you are never stuck with your current patterns. Not at 30, not at 45, not at 55. You can literally rewire the neural pathways that create resistance and replace them with pathways that generate drive. But this doesn't happen through motivation or inspiration. It happens through specific, deliberate techniques that we're going to walk through in detail. The 3 core resistance patterns your brain uses to keep you stuck are these. Procrastination, the mechanism your brain uses to avoid anything uncertain or uncomfortable by postponing it. Instead of saying, "I don't want to do this," it says, "I'll do it later," which preserves your self-image as a committed person while allowing you to avoid the discomfort indefinitely. Perfectionism, the mechanism your brain uses to avoid the risk of failure or judgment by keeping you in perpetual preparation. There's always more research to do, better timing to wait for, more optimal conditions to arrange. Perfectionism feels like high standards. It is actually sophisticated avoidance. Rationalization, the mechanism your brain uses to justify abandoning difficult pursuits while maintaining your sense of self. When the going gets hard, your brain provides perfectly constructed logical arguments for why this goal isn't actually important, why the timing is wrong, why a different approach makes more sense, and they always sound completely reasonable. Recognizing these patterns in yourself in real time as they're happening is the first step toward breaking them. But recognition alone changes nothing. You need to reprogram the system itself. And that's exactly what we're building from here. The problem with trying harder. Here's a question worth sitting with for a moment. How many times in your life have you decided to change something, really decided, with full conviction, and then watched that conviction slowly dissolve over the following days and weeks? How many Monday mornings have you started with total clarity about what you needed to do, only to find yourself back in the same patterns by Wednesday? If you're like most people, the answer is more times than you'd like to count. And here's what you probably told yourself each time it happened. I just need more discipline, more commitment, more willpower. Next time, I'll try harder. But trying harder is precisely the wrong prescription, because the problem was never your effort level. The problem was your approach. You were trying to change behavior through force, through conscious, effortful, willpower-dependent resistance against deeply ingrained automatic patterns. And that is, by design, a losing battle. The approach that actually works is fundamentally different. Instead of forcing yourself to make better choices in the moment, when your willpower is depleted, your amygdala is firing, and System 1 is running the show, you make one set of intentional decisions in advance that shape all your future automatic choices. You stop fighting your environment. You redesign it. You stop negotiating with your impulses. You eliminate the conditions that generate them. You stop relying on motivation to appear. You build systems that produce the right behavior, regardless of how you feel. This is what I call the force system, and it's built on 3 interconnected components that work together to make challenging behaviors automatic, consistent, and sustainable without requiring heroic amounts of mental effort. Those 3 components are trigger modification, response replacement, and reward restructuring. Let's go deep on each one. Trigger modification, redesigning what your environment asks of you. Your brain is responding to triggers every single moment of every single day, and most of them are completely invisible to you. The notification sound on your phone triggers an almost involuntary reach. The sight of the couch when you walk in the door after work triggers a powerful urge to sit down and decompress. The smell of coffee triggers a craving before you've made a conscious choice. The feeling of stress triggers a reach toward whatever your personal comfort habit happens to be. Food, alcohol, scrolling, television, anything that provides temporary relief. These triggers aren't signs of weakness. They're signs of a brain doing exactly what brains do, responding automatically to environmental cues that have been reinforced through repetition. The insight here is profound in its simplicity. If your environment is full of triggers that produce behaviors you don't want, you can change the environment and change the behaviors that follow. And conversely, if you deliberately place triggers in your environment that produce behaviors you do want, those behaviors will start happening automatically. This is trigger modification, and it's not about willpower at all. It's about environmental architecture. Here's what this looks like in practice for someone with your life complexity. If you want to exercise consistently, you don't rely on motivation to get yourself to the gym. You lay your workout clothes out the night before, physically visible, impossible to ignore when you wake up. You put your gym bag by the front door so you have to step over it to leave the house. You set your alarm on the other side of the room so you have to physically get up to turn it off. You've created a sequential chain of environmental triggers that guide you toward the gym without requiring a single effortful decision in the moment. If you want to read more and scroll less, you place the book on your pillow before you go downstairs in the morning, so it's waiting for you when you come to bed at night. You plug your phone in to charge in a room other than your bedroom. You've made the desired behavior easy and the competing behavior inconvenient. If you want to eat better, you don't rely on your 9 p.m. depleted brain self to make nutritious choices. You spend 30 minutes on Sunday making those choices for them, preparing, portioning, positioning healthy options at eye level in the fridge, and simply not purchasing the items that hijack your evenings. Notice what's happening here. You're not fighting your automatic brain, you're pre-programming it. You're shaping the environment so that System 1, the fast, automatic, effortless system, is pointed at the targets you actually want to hit. The practical audit is this. Walk through your typical day and identify every environmental trigger that currently produces a behavior you don't want. Then identify every behavior you're trying to build and ask yourself, what trigger is missing? What environmental cue would make this behavior the obvious, natural, automatic choice? Then redesign your physical space accordingly. This single practice, done thoughtfully and consistently, will do more for your discipline than any amount of motivational content you could consume. Response, replacement. Changing what happens when resistance arrives. Even with a well-designed environment, resistance will still show up. Your brain will still generate objections, excuses, and perfectly rational-sounding arguments for choosing comfort over challenge. The question is, what happens in that moment? Most people do one of two things. They either give in immediately, following the path of least resistance without much conscious awareness, or they engage in internal negotiation, debating with themselves, weighing the pros and cons, trying to rationalize their way to the right choice. Both of these approaches tend to produce the same result. The easy option wins. Response replacement is a different approach entirely. Instead of negotiating with resistance in the moment, which is exactly where your brain wants you because negotiation is exhausting and resistance has infinite patience, you pre-decide your response to common resistance patterns. You create what I call response scripts. These are predetermined mental responses to the specific objections your brain reliably generates, so that when they appear, you don't have to think. You just execute. Here's the key principle. Resistance always speaks in feelings. It says, I don't feel like it. I'm too tired. This is too much. I'm not ready. Your response scripts redirect attention away from feelings and toward predetermined actions. When your brain says, I don't feel like working out, your response script isn't a motivational argument. It's a behavioral instruction. Put on the shoes. That's all? Just the shoes. When your brain says this project is too overwhelming, your response script isn't a pep talk. It's a single, tiny directive. Open the document. Read the last paragraph I wrote. That's the only job right now. When your brain says, I'll check social media just for a minute, your response script is, write down 3 things I need to accomplish before I open any app. The power of response scripts is that they bypass the emotional negotiation entirely. Your brain generates resistance through emotional reasoning, making you feel like avoidance is the right choice. Response scripts short-circuit that process by triggering a predetermined behavioral sequence before the emotional argument can gain traction. This requires preparation. You need to sit down, ideally once when you're calm and not in resistance mode, and map out the specific objections your brain reliably generates for each important area of your life. Then write the response script for each one. These become your automatic responses over time. The more you use them, the more automatic they become. You're literally building new neural pathways that respond to resistance with action instead of avoidance. Reward restructuring, training your brain to crave what's hard. Here's the deepest layer of the force system, and arguably the most transformative. Your current reward system was shaped by evolution and turbocharged by modern technology. The biggest, fastest dopamine hits in your daily life come from easy pleasures. The notification that someone liked your post, the immediate relief of checking something off a to-do list, the comfort of food that wasn't earned, the escape of entertainment that requires nothing of you. These aren't character flaws. They're the natural result of a reward system meeting an environment specifically engineered to exploit it. The neurological problem this creates is straightforward. Your brain is wired to repeat behaviors that generate dopamine. If easy behaviors generate the most dopamine, your brain will relentlessly gravitate toward easy behaviors and away from challenging ones that offer delayed, less immediate rewards. This is why meaningful goals feel hard to pursue even when you desperately want the outcomes they'd create. Your brain isn't connecting the daily effort to the eventual reward clearly enough to generate consistent motivation. Reward restructuring solves this by artificially creating immediate dopamine responses for challenging behaviors, training your brain to associate difficulty with pleasure instead of discomfort. Here's what this looks like practically. Every time you do something genuinely hard, finish a difficult work session, complete a workout you didn't want to do, have a conversation you'd been avoiding, resist an impulse you usually give into, you immediately give yourself a small, deliberate reward that generates positive feeling. This doesn't mean undermining your goals. It means creating micro-celebrations that are immediate enough to form a neurological association between the hard behavior and something pleasant. This could be 30 seconds of genuine internal acknowledgement, not hollow self-praise, but real recognition. I did something hard. That required something of me. That was a real choice. It could be a brief physical break, a specific beverage you enjoy, a 5-minute activity you find genuinely pleasurable. The specifics matter less than the immediacy and consistency. What you're doing is literally rewiring the connection in your brain between difficulty and outcome. Over weeks, this rewiring becomes automatic. Your brain begins to anticipate the positive feeling that follows challenging behavior, and that anticipation becomes motivation. What once felt like something to endure starts to feel like something to seek out. Challenge stops being a cost and starts being a reward in itself. This sounds almost too simple, but it's backed by decades of behavioral neuroscience. The brain doesn't change through understanding. It changes through repeated, rewarded experience. Environmental programming. Designing your world for automatic execution. Beyond the four system components, there's a broader principle that ties everything together. Your environment is constantly programming your behavior, whether you're intentional about it or not. Every space you inhabit, every visual field you occupy, every routine you move through is sending constant signals to your brain about what actions to take next. Most people live in environments that were designed for comfort, convenience, and passive consumption, which means most people are fighting their environment every time they try to do something meaningful. But you can reverse engineer this entirely. The principle of visual priming says that what you see shapes what you do, often before you've made any conscious decision. If your workout equipment is visible and accessible, you're more likely to use it. If your books are on your nightstand instead of a shelf in another room, you're more likely to read them. If your desk is clean and your work materials are organized and ready, your brain receives a signal that productive work is the natural next action. Conversely, if your phone is on your desk during focus time, you will check it. If junk food is in your kitchen, you will eat it. If your bed is visible from your workspace, your brain will generate tiredness. Visual environment is not neutral. Design it deliberately. The principle of friction engineering is equally powerful. Your brain naturally gravitates toward the path of least resistance, always, without exception. So the question becomes, which path have you made least resistant? Friction engineering means adding friction to behaviors you want to reduce and removing friction from behaviors you want to increase. Delete the social media apps that hijack your attention. Reinstalling them when you want them requires enough effort that you'll often choose not to bother. Prepare your healthy meals in advance so that eating well requires less effort than ordering food you'll regret. Set up your workspace the night before so that starting important work in the morning requires no setup energy. You're not fighting your brain's tendency toward ease. You're redirecting it. The principle of context stacking, sometimes called habit stacking, leverages your existing automatic behaviors as launchpads for new ones. Your brain already runs dozens of automatic sequences every day. Morning coffee, brushing teeth, getting in the car, sitting down at your desk. These are deeply grooved neural highways that happen without any conscious effort. By attaching new behaviors immediately after existing automatic ones, you make the new behavior piggyback on the existing neural momentum. After I pour my coffee, I open my journal for 5 minutes. After I sit at my desk, I write the single most important thing I need to accomplish today before I open email. After I change out of work clothes, I put on my workout gear. The new behavior borrows authority from the old one. Over time, it develops its own groove, its own automatic trigger, and becomes self-sustaining. Finally, The principle of social environmental design recognizes something uncomfortable but important. The people you spend the most time with have an enormous, often underestimated influence on what you consider normal, possible, and acceptable. If you're consistently surrounded by people who make excuses, avoid challenges, and settle for less than they're capable of, that becomes the water you swim in. Their standards become your ambient standard, often without you noticing. If you're surrounded by people who take action, embrace difficulty, hold themselves accountable, and push toward meaningful goals, that becomes your ambient standard. This doesn't mean abandoning relationships that matter to you. It means being intentional about where you invest your social energy. It means seeking out communities, conversations, and relationships where high standards are normal rather than exceptional. It means finding at least one accountability partner, someone who will expect you to follow through, who will notice when you don't, and whose opinion you genuinely care about. Because here's what social accountability activates: a motivational system far older and more powerful than willpower. Your brain is wired at a fundamental level to care about how you are perceived by the people in your community. That drive can be redirected from seeking comfort to seeking growth, simply by changing who you're seeking approval from. Implementation intentions, the if-then protocol that bypasses resistance. The final element of the force system is one of the most research-supported behavior change tools available, and one of the least used. Implementation intentions are if-then plans that pre-decide your response to specific resistance scenarios. The research behind this is remarkable. People who form specific if-then plans for their goals are 2 to 3 times more likely to follow through than people who simply have strong intentions. Not because they're more motivated, because they've removed the in-the-moment decision from the equation entirely. Here's the structure. If resistance trigger or situation, then I will predetermine specific action. If I feel like skipping my workout, then I will put on my training clothes and commit to only 10 minutes. If I feel overwhelmed by the project, then I will open it and work for exactly 15 minutes. Nothing more required. If I feel the urge to check my phone during a focused work block, then I will write down the 3 most important things I need to complete before I allow myself to look. The specificity matters enormously. Vague intentions create space for negotiation. Specific if-then plans close that space. Your brain doesn't have to deliberate. It simply recognizes the trigger and executes the predetermined response. Resistance meets a pre-built answer rather than an open-ended debate. And debates are where resistance wins. Spend 30 minutes writing your personal implementation intentions for every major area where you experience consistent resistance. Write them in specific behavioral language. Review them regularly until they become second nature. This is not a complex exercise, but the gap between people who do it and people who don't is enormous, and it shows up clearly in results. Stop pushing. Start pulling. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with physical tiredness. You know the feeling. You're sitting in front of something important, a task, a decision, a conversation you need to have, a goal you need to move toward. And instead of energy, you feel this heavy, grinding resistance, like trying to push a car uphill with your bare hands. You know you should move. You know you need to move. But the effort required feels disproportionate to anything you can summon. Most advice tells you the solution is to push harder, grit your teeth, dig deeper, find more willpower. But what if the problem isn't the amount of force you're applying? What if the problem is the direction you're pushing? Think about how physical leverage works. A person of average strength using a long enough lever positioned at the right fulcrum point can move an object that would be immovable through direct force alone. The lever doesn't create strength from nothing. It amplifies existing strength by changing the mechanics of how force is applied. Mental leverage works on exactly the same principle. Instead of trying to overpower your resistance through raw mental effort, which depletes you and eventually fails, you position specific psychological techniques at the right fulcrum points in your mental architecture. The result is that the same effort you've always had available produces dramatically greater output. You stop pushing against your brain, you start pulling with it. There are 6 mental leverage techniques that together create a comprehensive psychological system for making hard things not just possible, but progressively natural. Let's go through each one with the depth it deserves. Leverage technique 1. Pain, pleasure, repositioning. Your brain makes every single behavioral decision based on a simple, unconscious calculation. Will this move me toward pleasure or away from pain? This calculation happens faster than conscious thought. And for most people, most of the time, it's aimed in entirely the wrong direction. Right now, your brain has learned, through years of reinforced experience, to associate challenging activities with pain. Working out is associated with discomfort and fatigue. Starting difficult projects is associated with anxiety and the possibility of failure. Having hard conversations is associated with conflict and emotional exposure. Pursuing ambitious goals is associated with risk, uncertainty, and the threat of disappointment. Meanwhile, avoidance is associated with immediate relief. Procrastination feels like freedom. Comfort feels like safety. Easy choices feel like rest. So when your brain runs its pain-pleasure calculation on work on the important project versus watch something comfortable, the math comes out the same way every time. Pain-pleasure repositioning means deliberately, systematically retraining what your brain associates with difficulty. This isn't positive thinking. It isn't telling yourself that hard things feel great when they don't. It's a specific neurological reprogramming process based on where you direct your conscious attention during and after challenging experiences. Here's how it works in practice when you're doing something hard. In the middle of a difficult workout, pushing through a frustrating work session, having a conversation that requires courage, your brain is generating 2 simultaneous streams of experience. One stream notices the discomfort, the effort, the friction. The other stream contains the growth, the capability development, the proof of your own agency. Most people focus almost entirely on the first stream, which means that's the association their brain strengthens. Pain-pleasure repositioning means consciously redirecting your attention to the second stream, not by denying the first, but by choosing what you amplify. Instead of thinking this is hard and I want it to be over, you deliberately redirect to this is exactly where I'm getting stronger. This discomfort is the feeling of my brain building new capability. Instead of focusing on how much further you have to go, you focus on how far you've already come in this specific session. You do this consistently, deliberately every single time. And over weeks, your brain begins to update its associations. The neural pathways connecting challenge to discomfort weaken through disuse. The neural pathways connecting challenge to growth and reward strengthen through repetition. Eventually, something remarkable happens. Difficulty starts to feel different, not easy, but meaningful, even satisfying. The resistance is still there, but your brain no longer interprets it as a reason to stop. It starts to interpret it as confirmation that something worth doing is happening. This is not theoretical. This is neuroplasticity in action, and it's available to you regardless of how deeply your current associations are grooved. Leverage technique 2, future self-visualization. Your brain has a fascinating and often frustrating quirk. It processes abstract future concepts very poorly, but responds to concrete sensory experiences with enormous power. Tell your brain in 10 years your health choices today will compound into either vitality or decline, and your brain nods politely and then reaches for the snack anyway. The future is too abstract, too distant, too vague to generate present moment motivation. But show your brain, in vivid sensory, emotionally engaged detail, a concrete image of what your life actually looks and feels like when you've done the hard things consistently. And something very different happens. Your brain begins to treat that future as real, as achievable, as something worth moving toward right now. Future self-visualization is the practice of making your desired future so concrete and emotionally vivid that your brain starts making present moment decisions in service of it. This is not a 5-second mental exercise. Done properly, it's a deliberate, immersive practice that engages all your senses and your deepest emotional responses. Here's the structure that works. Find 10 minutes of genuine quiet. Close your eyes and build the scene with complete specificity. You're not visualizing vague success. You're visualizing a specific morning, a specific interaction, a specific moment in your future life that represents the result of having consistently done hard things. What does your body feel like when you wake up that morning? What's the first thought that crosses your mind? What do you see when you look in the mirror? Not just physically, but in your own eyes. How do you move through your day? What's the quality of your relationships? How do you show up in conversations, at work, at home, with the people who matter most to you? What's the feeling in your chest when you look at what you've built, what you've become, what you've proven? To yourself? Feel the emotions fully. Let the pride, the confidence, the deep satisfaction land in your body as real physical sensations, not as concepts, but as experiences. Then gently ask yourself, what is the one action I can take today that moves me toward this person? The power of this practice comes from consistent repetition. The more vividly and regularly you visit this future self, the more real it becomes to your brain, and the more naturally your present choices align with it. Your future self is not a stranger you're making sacrifices for. They are you, and visualization is the bridge that makes that connection neurologically real. Leverage technique 3, identity-based leverage. This is perhaps the most powerful and most underused leverage technique available to you. Here's the principle. Your brain is wired for self-consistency. Once it has a clear picture of who you are, it automatically generates behaviors that match that picture. Because inconsistency between identity and behavior creates a deep psychological discomfort that the brain will work hard to resolve. Most people try to change their behavior directly. They focus on outcomes. I want to lose weight. I want to be more productive. I want to exercise regularly. But outcome-focused goals are fragile because they depend on sustained motivation, and motivation is unreliable. Identity-based change works differently. Instead of trying to change what you do, you change how you see yourself. And the behaviors follow automatically, driven by your brain's powerful drive for self-consistency. The practical shift is subtle but profound. Instead of, I want to get in shape, you adopt, I am someone who takes care of their body. Instead of, I should work harder, you adopt, I am someone who follows through on commitments. Instead of, I need to stop procrastinating, you adopt, I am someone who acts decisively on what matters. These aren't affirmations. They're identity statements, and they work by giving your brain a self-image to protect. Once your brain believes you are a certain type of person, it doesn't just allow behaviors that match that identity. It generates them. Skipping the workout doesn't just feel like a missed opportunity anymore. It feels like a violation of who you are. That dissonance is uncomfortable, and your brain will work to resolve it by moving toward action. But here's what's crucial. Identity doesn't change through declaration alone. It changes through evidence. Every time you act in alignment with your chosen identity, even in small ways, even imperfectly, you deposit a piece of evidence into your brain's file on who you are. Enough deposits, and the identity becomes self-reinforcing. It stops requiring effort to maintain because it has become genuinely and neurologically your default sense of self. Every time you choose the hard thing, you're not just completing a task. You're casting a vote for the person you're becoming. Leverage Technique 4. Temporal leverage. Your cognitive performance is not flat across the day. It rises, peaks, and declines in patterns that are largely predictable and largely ignored by most people's scheduling habits. Temporal leverage means matching the difficulty of your tasks to the quality of your cognitive resources at any given point in your day. For the majority of people, particularly those in their mid-adult years, peak mental clarity, creative capacity, and decision-making quality occur within the first 2 to 4 hours after waking. This is when your prefrontal cortex is freshest. Your dopamine systems are most responsive, and your capacity for sustained focused effort is at its highest. This prime cognitive window is, for most people, squandered. It's spent checking email, catching up on messages, handling administrative tasks, scrolling through news, attending meetings that could have been emails. The highest value hours of your day are consumed by the lowest value activities, and the genuinely important work gets pushed to later when your cognitive resources are diminished. Temporal leverage means making a non-negotiable commitment. Your most important, most challenging work gets your best hours, not your email, not other people's requests and priorities, not the tasks that feel easy and give you the illusion of productivity. Your most important work, the work that will actually move your life forward, gets scheduled into your peak window and protected there ferociously. Later in the day, when your mental energy has declined, you handle the tasks that require less cognitive depth, administrative work, routine communications, logistics, planning. You're still working, but you're matching task demand to resource availability. This one structural change, simply protecting your peak hours for your most important work, will produce more meaningful output in a week than months of grinding ineffectively at the wrong times. The execution engine, turning intention into action. Without heroic willpower, mental leverage multiplies your psychological power. But power without direction is still just potential. What converts potential into actual results is execution. And most people have a profound execution problem that has nothing to do with how much they know or how motivated they feel. The execution gap is the space between knowing what to do and actually doing it. And it's in this gap that most ambitions quietly die. The reason most people live in chronic preparation mode, reading, planning, researching, getting ready to get ready, is that they're waiting for motivation to bridge the gap between intention and action. But motivation is not a reliable bridge. It appears sporadically, disappears without warning, and is completely absent precisely when the task is hardest and most important. What you need is not motivation. You need an execution engine, a systematic approach that produces action automatically, regardless of how you feel. The execution engine runs on 3 core principles. Principle 1, immediate action, bias. The most dangerous moment in any challenging task is the pause between deciding to do it and actually starting. In that pause, your brain generates every excuse, every objection, every perfectly reasonable argument for delay. The longer the pause, the more powerful the resistance becomes. Analysis breeds more analysis. Hesitation breeds more hesitation. Immediate action bias means defaulting to starting before your brain has time to build its case against it. When you decide to do something important, the move is to take the smallest possible physical action toward it within seconds, not minutes, seconds. You don't think about the entire workout. You put on the shoes. You don't think about completing the project. You open the document. You don't think about having the full difficult conversation. You send the message that initiates it. The neurological principle at work here is momentum. A body in motion tends to stay in motion. And this is as true for mental and behavioral motion as it is for physical motion. The hardest part of any challenging task is the transition from stillness to movement. Once you're moving, even incrementally, even imperfectly, momentum begins to carry you forward naturally. The 5-minute rule operationalizes this perfectly. When resistance is high, you commit to doing the hard thing for exactly 5 minutes. That's all. 5 minutes is the only commitment required. Your brain can't generate significant resistance to 5 minutes. It feels manageable. It feels safe. So you start. And then, almost every time, for almost every person, 5 minutes becomes 10, becomes 30, becomes the full session. Because starting was the only real obstacle, and you've bypassed it entirely. Principle 2, progressive momentum. Sustained execution isn't built through occasional heroic efforts. It's built through consistent small actions that compound over time into unrecognizable results. Progressive momentum means starting smaller than feels meaningful, winning consistently, and gradually expanding. Most people approach behavior change with an all-or-nothing mentality. They commit to the full transformation immediately, the complete lifestyle overhaul, the intensive daily routine, the dramatic change, because anything less feels inadequate to the size of what they want to achieve. This is well-intentioned and reliably counterproductive. Your brain doesn't build new behavioral patterns through large, effortful leaps. It builds them through small, repeated, successful experiences that gradually deepen neural grooves until the behavior becomes automatic. Every time you complete a commitment, however small, you generate a neurological win that makes the next completion slightly easier and slightly more likely. Every time you fail to complete a commitment, you reinforce the neural pattern of failure and make the next attempt harder. This means your most important early priority is not progress, it's winning. Creating an unbroken chain of successful completions that trains your brain to associate this area of your life with success rather than struggle. Start embarrassingly small if necessary. 5 minutes of exercise is infinitely better than no exercise and a reinforced identity as someone who doesn't follow through. 1 page of writing is infinitely better than no writing, and another day of telling yourself you'll do it tomorrow. Build the winning streak first. Expand the commitment as the wins accumulate and the automatic pattern strengthens. Principle 3. The non-negotiation policy. The third principle of the execution engine is perhaps the most powerful and requires genuine commitment to implement. The non-negotiation policy means identifying specific critical behaviors as completely non-negotiable, conditions that cannot be debated, excused away, or rescheduled regardless of circumstance. Here's why this matters so profoundly. Every time a behavior is negotiable, every time you leave open the question of whether you'll do it based on how you feel, your brain treats it as optional. And the same brain that generates resistance to hard things will reliably, creatively, convincingly generate reasons why today is the exception. But when a behavior is genuinely non-negotiable, when it has the same categorical status in your mind as paying your mortgage or showing up to work, your brain stops generating debate about it. It simply executes. The energy that was previously spent in internal negotiation. Should I do this today? Am I too tired? Maybe just this once? Gets completely eliminated. Your brain knows the answer before the question forms. Your non-negotiables should be small in number, but absolute in commitment. 2 or 3 critical daily behaviors that represent the foundation of who you're becoming. Not 20 aspirational habits. 2 or 3 iron rules that you keep without exception. For example, I never skip 2 consecutive days of intentional movement. I always complete my most important task before I check email or messages. I never make significant decisions when I'm emotionally activated. These become load-bearing walls in your behavioral architecture. Everything else can flex. These do not. The psychological power of this is enormous. Every day you uphold a non-negotiable, you deposit evidence into your identity as someone who follows through. Over months, this becomes the most reliable foundation of self-trust you've ever built because it's proven, not just believed. Accountability triggers, making the cost of inaction. Real, The execution engine has one final component that activates a motivational system more ancient and more powerful than any individual resolve. Accountability triggers create external social consequences for failing to execute. Consequences real enough that your brain's deeply wired drive for social standing becomes an ally in your discipline. Your brain is fundamentally evolutionarily social. Your ancestors' survival depended on maintaining standing within their community. The drive to be seen as reliable, capable, and trustworthy is not a nice personality trait. It's a hardwired survival mechanism. When you make a public commitment, telling someone whose opinion matters to you what you're going to do and when, you activate this mechanism. Now, failing to execute isn't just a personal setback, it's a social one. And your brain will generate significant energy to avoid that outcome. This is why accountability partnerships work so reliably. Not because your partner forces you to do anything, but because their expectation activates a part of your motivation that purely internal commitment cannot access. Choose one person, a friend, a colleague, a partner, a coach, who will genuinely expect follow-through from you. Share your commitments specifically and measurably. Check in regularly. Make the accountability real enough to matter. Then watch what happens to your execution rate. The attention crisis nobody is talking about. Let me ask you something direct. When was the last time you worked on something genuinely important? Not busy work, not email, not tasks that create the comfortable illusion of productivity, for 2 uninterrupted hours, with complete focus, without checking your phone, without switching tabs, without letting your mind drift to something easier. If you had to think about it for more than a few seconds, you've identified one of the most significant performance gaps in your life. And you're not alone. The average adult today, regardless of intelligence, education, or professional capability, can sustain genuine focus on a single task for less than 12 minutes before their attention either gets pulled away by an external interruption or drifts away through internal distraction. 12 minutes. In a world where the most meaningful work, the work that builds careers, deepens relationships, creates real financial progress, advances important projects, requires sustained concentration measured in hours, not minutes. This is not a generational weakness or a personal failing. It's the predictable result of living in an environment specifically engineered to fracture your attention. Every app on your phone, every notification system, every platform you use has been designed by teams of engineers whose explicit job is to capture your attention and hold it as long as possible. Because your attention is the product being sold, and they're extraordinarily good at their jobs. The result is that your ability to focus deeply has been systematically eroded over years, often without you noticing, because the erosion happened gradually and the distractions were genuinely pleasurable in the moment. But here's what makes this both sobering and hopeful in equal measure. Focus is not a fixed trait. It's a trainable skill, and it responds to deliberate practice exactly the way a physical muscle responds to progressive resistance training. Every time you resist a distraction and maintain concentration on something that matters, you strengthen the neural networks responsible for sustained attention. Every time you give in to distraction, every time you reach for the phone, switch tabs, or let your mind drift to something easier. Those networks weaken slightly, and the distraction pathways strengthen. You have been training your brain every day of your adult life. The question is what you've been training it to do. The good news is that this can change, deliberately, systematically, and faster than you might expect. How deep focus actually works. Most people think of focus as a binary state. Either you're focused or you're not. But focus actually operates along a spectrum of depth, and understanding this changes how you approach concentration entirely. When you first sit down to work on something challenging, your brain doesn't immediately achieve deep concentration. It takes time, typically 15 to 20 minutes of sustained, uninterrupted attention, before you reach the deeper levels of cognitive engagement, where complex thinking, creative problem-solving, and genuine insight become accessible. Think of it like diving underwater. The first few meters are turbulent, the surface noise is still close, the light is still bright. You're still aware of everything above. But as you descend deeper, the turbulence fades, the noise disappears, and a different quality of clarity becomes available. This is where the real work happens. But most people never reach those depths. They sit down to work, get 12 minutes in, check a notification, and surface completely. Then they dive again, surface again, dive again. They spend their entire work session in the shallow, turbulent zone, busy, tired, but never reaching the depth where meaningful output actually gets produced. And then they wonder why they worked all day and have so little to show for it. The implications of this are significant. A single 2-hour block of genuine deep focus will produce more meaningful output than 6 hours of fragmented, interrupted shallow work. This isn't an opinion. It's a consistent finding across productivity research, across industries, across types of work. Depth is not just preferable to breadth of time. It's qualitatively different in what it produces. This means your first priority isn't working more hours. It's protecting the conditions for depth within the hours you have. Building your deep focus practice. The external environment comes first, and it must be treated as a non-negotiable rather than a preference. Your phone should not be on silent in the same room. It should be in a different room entirely. Research is unambiguous on this point. The mere presence of your smartphone on your desk, even face down, even powered off, measurably reduces your available cognitive capacity. Not because you're using it, because your brain is expending resources managing the temptation of it. Remove it physically. This is not a suggestion. It's a foundational requirement for serious focus. All notifications on every device in your workspace should be disabled during focus blocks, not reduced, disabled. Every notification represents a context switch, and context switches are neurologically expensive. Your brain requires time and energy to return to depth after every interruption. If you're being interrupted every few minutes, you're paying that re-entry cost continuously while never achieving the depth that justifies it. Your workspace should contain only what's relevant to the current task. Visual complexity competes for attentional resources. A cluttered desk isn't just aesthetically unpleasant, it's neurologically costly. Clear the space, clear the mental field. Now, the internal environment. external distractions removed, you'll immediately discover the second and more challenging problem: internal distractions. The constant stream of thoughts, concerns, memories, random associations, and mental chatter that arises the moment you try to concentrate on something difficult. This is where most focus attempts fail. People eliminate external distractions, sit down, and then discover that their own mind is the most relentless source of interruption. The solution is not to suppress these thoughts. That's neurologically impossible and counterproductive. The solution is the attention anchor technique. An attention anchor is a predetermined focal point that you return to every single time your attention drifts. This might be your breathing. It might be a specific physical sensation, the feeling of your feet on the floor, your hands on the keyboard. It might be a single word or brief phrase that you repeat silently when you notice your mind has wandered. When distraction arises, and it will continuously, especially when you're building this practice, you don't fight it. Don't judge it. Don't get frustrated by it. You simply notice it and return to your anchor. This process, notice, return, is not a failure of focus. It is the practice of focus. Every single time you notice your attention has drifted and bring it back, you're performing the mental equivalent of a bicep curl. You're literally strengthening the neural network responsible for sustained attention. The goal is not to eliminate mind wandering. It's to reduce the time between wandering and returning, and over weeks of practice, that time decreases dramatically. The Progressive Focus Protocol. You don't build serious focus capacity by immediately attempting 3-hour deep work sessions. That's the equivalent of someone who hasn't exercised in years attempting a marathon on their first day. It produces failure, frustration, and reinforced avoidance. You build focus capacity progressively, starting at a level that creates genuine challenge without overwhelming your current capacity. Begin with focus blocks of 25 minutes. This is deliberately modest, achievable enough that your brain can't generate credible resistance, challenging enough that it requires real effort. Use a timer. Work on a single, clearly defined task. No switching, no checking. When the timer ends, take a genuine 5-minute break, away from screens, away from your work, before the next block. After 2 weeks at this level, assuming you're genuinely protecting the focus conditions, extend to 35-minute blocks, then 45, then 60. Build gradually, always staying at the edge of your current capacity without exceeding it. The key metric is not the length of your focus blocks. It's the quality of attention within them. A 25-minute block of genuine, deep, undistracted focus is worth more than 90 minutes of shallow, interrupted work that merely looks like concentration. As your capacity builds, something important shifts. Focus stops feeling like a battle against distraction and starts feeling like a state you can enter deliberately, a mental gear you shift into with increasing ease. What once required enormous effort to sustain for 20 minutes becomes something you can maintain comfortably for 90. This is the compound effect of focus training, and it produces one of the most significant performance advantages available to anyone in your professional and personal life: the concept of attention residue. There's a phenomenon that explains why multitasking is not just ineffective, but actively harmful to your cognitive performance, and why the way most people work is quietly destroying their output quality. When you switch from one task to another, part of your attention doesn't make the transition fully. A portion of your cognitive resources remains allocated to the previous task, still processing it, still occupied by it, even as your conscious focus has moved on. Researchers call this attention residue, and its effects on subsequent task performance are significant and measurable. Every time you check your email during a creative work session, the email conversation occupies part of your mental bandwidth long after you've closed it. Every time you respond to a message in the middle of a complex problem, the message lingers in your attentional field while you're trying to think clearly about something else. This is why the common habit of keeping email open in a background tab while working on important tasks is so neurologically costly. You're not just occasionally distracted. You're continuously contaminating your primary focus with residual processing from every brief interruption. The solution is single tasking with clean transitions. Do one thing fully. When you're done, or when you've reached a natural stopping point, close it completely before opening the next thing. Give your brain the clean break it needs to fully shift context, rather than dragging residue from task to task throughout your day. This simple structural change, one thing at a time, complete transitions, will improve the quality of your cognitive output noticeably within days. Habit architecture, programming, automatic success. You've now built the tools to force action and sustain focus. But there's a deeper layer of performance infrastructure that determines whether your results are occasional or consistent, temporary or permanent. Habits. Everything you are today is the accumulated result of behaviors you've repeated consistently over time. Your fitness, your financial position, your relationship quality, your professional reputation, your mental and emotional state. All of it is largely the product of what you've been doing automatically, without conscious deliberation, day after day. This cuts both ways. Your current automatic behaviors, the ones that run without requiring any decision, are producing your current results. If you want different results, you need different automatic behaviors. And building those requires understanding how habits actually form in the brain. Your brain creates habits through a three-part neurological loop: cue, routine, reward. Every habit begins with a trigger, a cue in your environment or internal state that signals a particular behavioral routine to begin. The routine runs automatically, and at its conclusion, some form of reward, a feeling of relief, pleasure, satisfaction, or completion reinforces the pattern, making it more likely to repeat the next time the cue appears. This loop, once established, runs without conscious involvement. That's the entire point of a habit, to automate a behavior so completely that it requires no deliberate mental energy to execute. The profound implication is this: you are not just building behaviors when you build habits. You are programming your brain's automatic operating system. You are determining what happens in your life without requiring any further conscious decision-making. The minimum effective dose principle. The most common mistake in habit formation is starting too large. You decide to transform your fitness, so you commit to daily 2-hour workouts. You decide to develop a writing practice, so you commit to producing 1,000 words every morning. You decide to meditate, so you commit to 30-minute sessions. These commitments feel appropriately ambitious, and they reliably fail, not because the goals are wrong, but because the initial commitment exceeds your brain's current capacity for effortless execution, which means it requires willpower every single time. And we've already established what happens to willpower-dependent behaviors under real-life pressure. The minimum effective dose principle says, make your initial habit so small that your brain cannot generate genuine resistance to it. Not small as a permanent destination. Small as a strategic starting point that guarantees consistent execution while the automatic pattern gets established. If you want to exercise daily, your initial commitment is not a full workout. It's putting on your exercise clothes. That's it. The entire commitment, just the clothes. If you want to build a writing practice, your initial commitment is opening the document and writing one sentence. 1. If you want to meditate, your initial commitment is sitting quietly with your eyes closed for 60 seconds. These feel almost absurdly small. That's precisely the point. Your brain cannot credibly resist 60 seconds of quiet sitting. It cannot summon meaningful objection to putting on exercise clothes. The resistance mechanism, which requires a certain threshold of perceived difficulty to activate, simply doesn't engage. And once you're in the clothes, you'll almost always do the workout. Once you've written the first sentence, you'll almost always write the next one. Once you've sat quietly for 60 seconds, the momentum of the state makes continuing natural. The small initial commitment is not the habit. It's the ignition for the habit. And ignition is the only part that actually requires engineering. Habit stacking. Borrowing momentum from what already works. Your brain already runs dozens of automatic behavioral sequences every day, patterns so deeply grooved that they happen without any conscious input. Morning coffee, brushing teeth, sitting at your desk, changing clothes when you get home, getting into your car. These existing automatic habits are neurological highways, high-speed, low-friction pathways that run effortlessly every day. Habit stacking means attaching new behaviors to these existing highways, placing the new habit immediately after an existing automatic one, so it inherits the momentum of the established pattern. The formula is simple. After existing habit, I will new habit. After I pour my morning coffee, I will write in my journal for 5 minutes. After I sit down at my desk, I will write tomorrow's single most important task before opening email. After I change out of my work clothes, I will put on my exercise gear. After I brush my teeth at night, I will read for 10 minutes. The new behavior doesn't have to generate its own activation energy. It borrows from the established pattern that precedes it. And over time, through consistent repetition, it develops its own neural groove and becomes self-sustaining. The keys to effective habit stacking are specificity and immediacy. The trigger habit must be clearly defined and highly consistent. The new habit must follow immediately, not after a pause, not after something else, but as the direct next action. And the sequence must be repeated consistently until the connection between them is automatic. Mental resilience, building the capacity to stay functional under pressure. Everything we've built so far, the force system, the execution engine, deep focus, habit architecture, will be tested. Repeatedly, unpredictably, and often at the worst possible moments. Life at 25 to 55 doesn't offer controlled conditions. It offers real pressure. Professional crises, relationship difficulties, financial strain, health challenges, loss, uncertainty, and the relentless complexity of managing a full adult life while simultaneously trying to grow. And here's the uncomfortable truth: the techniques that work perfectly when you're rested, resourced, and relatively calm will fail you completely if your psychological foundation can't hold under pressure. Mental resilience isn't about being immune to difficulty. It's about maintaining your functional capacity, your ability to think clearly, make good decisions, and take effective action when conditions are genuinely hard. And like every other capability we've discussed, it's trainable. The foundational principle is this: your capacity to handle stress expands through deliberate, progressive exposure to manageable stress, not through avoidance, which shrinks your capacity over time, not through overwhelming exposure, which creates trauma rather than resilience, but through the consistent practice of encountering difficulty, staying present with it, and functioning effectively through it. This process is called stress inoculation, and it's the same approach used to prepare military personnel, emergency responders, surgeons, and elite athletes for high-pressure performance. Stress inoculation in practice. You build stress tolerance by deliberately and progressively engaging with discomfort in controlled contexts. Cold exposure is one of the most accessible and well-documented methods. Taking cold showers, or simply ending your shower with 30 to 60 seconds of cold water, creates a controlled, predictable, non-dangerous stress response that trains your nervous system in a specific and important way. When cold water hits your skin, your nervous system activates immediately. Your instinct is to tense, to gasp, to escape. The discomfort is real and immediate. The training is this: choose to stay calm anyway. Breathe deliberately. Relax your muscles consciously. Remain steady despite the instinct to react. What you're training is the capacity to override your automatic stress response with conscious choice, to feel discomfort fully and function effectively anyway. Over weeks of consistent practice, this capacity generalizes. The same neurological pathway that helps you stay calm in cold water helps you stay calm in a difficult meeting, a tense conversation, an unexpected professional crisis. You're literally teaching your nervous system that discomfort doesn't equal danger, and that you can function clearly even when you're uncomfortable. Beyond physical stress exposure, cognitive resilience training means deliberately putting yourself in situations that challenge your mental comfort zone. Having the conversation you've been avoiding, taking on the project that stretches beyond your current certainty, speaking in contexts that create mild social anxiety, attempting things where failure is genuinely possible. The crucial element is not just exposure. It's maintaining conscious, deliberate control of your mental state during the exposure, not suppressing emotion, but choosing how to respond to it. Staying curious rather than reactive. Staying problem-focused rather than catastrophizing. Each time you do this, each time you encounter genuine difficulty and choose your response deliberately rather than reacting automatically, you strengthen the neural pathways responsible for emotional regulation and rational function under pressure. Reframing, changing the meaning of difficulty. The most immediate and accessible resilience tool is cognitive reframing, the practice of consciously choosing how you interpret challenging experiences. Your emotional response to any event is not determined by the event itself. It's determined by the meaning your brain assigns to it. Two people can face identical setbacks and have completely different emotional experiences, not because one is stronger, but because they've made different interpretations. This isn't wishful thinking. It's the practical application of a well-established neuropsychological principle. Meaning precedes emotion. Change the meaning, and the emotion follows. When you encounter a setback, a project that fails, a goal that proves harder than expected, a day where everything goes wrong, your brain automatically generates an interpretation. And for most people, that interpretation centers on threat, inadequacy, and evidence that success isn't available to them. Reframing means interrupting that automatic interpretation and consciously choosing a more accurate and more useful one. Not, this is evidence that I can't do this, but this is information about what doesn't work, which brings me closer to finding what does. Not, I'm failing, but I'm learning at the edge of my current capacity, which is exactly where growth happens. Not why is this happening to me, but how is navigating this making me more capable? These aren't denial. They're deliberate direction of your interpretive lens toward what's actually true and what's actually useful, rather than the automatic, threat-focused narrative your brain generates by default. Practice consistently. Reframing doesn't just help you feel better about difficulty. It fundamentally changes your relationship with challenge until difficulty stops being something that threatens your progress and starts being something that advances it. The moment before the breakthrough. Here's something nobody warns you about. The moment right before a genuine breakthrough. The moment where everything is about to change, where the effort you've invested is finally about to compound into something visible and real, feels almost indistinguishable from failure. Your progress has plateaued. The results you expected haven't materialized on the timeline you projected. The initial surge of motivation that carried you through the first weeks has long since faded. The people around you have stopped asking how it's going because they've quietly assumed you've moved on. And some part of your brain, the part that's been looking for permission to stop, is presenting a very compelling case that this is simply not working. This is the moment that determines everything, not the moment you decided to start, not the peak motivation days when action felt easy, not the early wins that confirmed you were on the right track. This moment, the one that looks like the end but is actually the threshold. The people who achieve extraordinary results in any area of life, in their careers, their health, their relationships, their finances, their personal development, are not necessarily more talented than those who don't. They are not always more intelligent, more resourced, or more advantaged. They are almost always more persistent. Not blindly persistent, not grinding away at a broken approach indefinitely, but strategically, intelligently, adaptively persistent. Committed absolutely to the destination while remaining completely flexible about the route. Understanding how to build and maintain this kind of persistence, especially in the complex, pressure-filled season of life you're navigating, is what separates outcomes that change your life from outcomes that merely fill journal entries about what you are going to do, why people quit, and it's never really about the goal. Let's be precise about this, because the conventional explanation is wrong. Most people don't quit because their goal becomes impossible. They quit because their current approach becomes unsustainable, and they mistake that experience for evidence that the goal itself is out of reach. There's a critical difference between those two things. When your current approach stops working, that's information. It's telling you something specific and useful about what needs to change. It's not telling you to stop. It's telling you to adapt. But when you're depleted, frustrated, and running low on the kind of hope that carries you through difficulty, information feels like verdict. The breakdown of a specific strategy feels like proof that you're not capable of achieving what you're after. And so, you stop, just before the point where adaptation would have worked. There are 3 specific thought patterns that drive premature quitting, and recognizing them in yourself in real time is the first line of defense against acting on them. The first is false permanence thinking, interpreting a temporary setback as a permanent condition. I've been doing this for 3 months, and the results aren't there becomes the results are never going to be there. The evidence doesn't support the conclusion. But in a depleted state, the brain makes this leap automatically and presents it as obvious. The second is false evidence of inadequacy, interpreting difficulty as proof of personal insufficiency. This is hard for me because I'm not the kind of person who succeeds at this. But difficulty is not evidence of inadequacy. Difficulty is evidence that you're attempting something that matters. Easy things don't change your life. The third is comparison collapse, measuring your Chapter 3 against someone else's Chapter 20 and concluding you're behind. You see the polished results of someone who's been at this for years. Compare them to your own early and messy progress, and interpret the gap as permanent rather than chronological. Notice when these thought patterns arise, name them specifically, and then, before you make any decisions based on them, apply what comes next. Outcome independence, the foundation of unstoppable persistence. The most psychologically durable form of persistence is built on a principle that sounds counterintuitive until you understand it fully. Detach your emotional state from short-term results while maintaining complete commitment to long-term direction. This is outcome independence, and it's the difference between motivation that's vulnerable to every setback and drive that can sustain itself through extended periods of uncertainty and apparent failure. Here's the practical reality. In any pursuit worth caring about, the timeline between consistent action and visible results is rarely linear and almost never as short as you hoped. There are periods of rapid progress followed by plateaus. There are inputs that don't produce immediate outputs. There are investments that take months to compound into anything measurable. If your emotional state is tied to short-term results, if you feel good when things are going well and lose motivation when they're not, your persistence will be perfectly calibrated to the moments when you need it least and will fail you precisely when you need it most. Outcome independence means your daily motivation comes from the process, from the identity you're building, the capability you're developing, the standard you're maintaining, rather than from whether today's results matched your expectations. You are not trying to feel successful. You are being someone who does the work, regardless of what the scoreboard shows today. This psychological stance has a profound practical effect. It makes setbacks informative rather than discouraging. It keeps your effort level consistent during the plateaus that precede every breakthrough, and it prevents the emotional roller coaster that exhausts people and eventually drives them to quit. You care deeply about where you're going. You're simply not letting today's mile marker determine your willingness to keep walking. The experimental mindset, turning failure into fuel. Every approach that doesn't work is data, not about your worth, not about your potential, not about whether your goal is achievable. Data about what this specific approach produces under these specific conditions. Data that makes your next iteration smarter and more likely to succeed. The experimental mindset reframes every failure as a research result. Think about how a scientist approaches a failed experiment. They don't interpret the failure as evidence that science is broken or that they should quit their field. They look at the data the failure produced, adjust their hypothesis, refine their methodology, and design the next experiment with more information than they had before. Successful people, the ones who eventually achieve what seemed impossible, operate exactly this way in their personal development. When a strategy doesn't work, they ask, what specifically failed? What does this result tell me about what I need to change? What would I do differently in the next iteration given what I now know? They fail fast and cheap, testing ideas quickly with limited investment, extracting the learning, and adjusting before committing enormous resources to an approach that isn't working. This mindset removes the emotional charge from failure entirely. Failed experiments are not personal rejections. They're simply the cost of gaining information, and information is what makes eventual success possible. The practical implementation is this: after any significant setback or disappointing result, before you make any decision about continuing or changing course, sit down and conduct a genuine post-mortem. What specifically happened? What did I expect to happen? What's the gap between expectation and result? What are 3 possible explanations for that gap? What would I test differently next time based on this information? This converts the energy of frustration, which otherwise becomes fuel for quitting, into the energy of strategic adaptation, which becomes fuel for eventual success. Minimum viable persistence. Never breaking the chain, there will be periods in your pursuit of meaningful goals where maintaining full intensity is genuinely impossible. Real life intervenes with real force. Illness, family crises, professional emergencies, grief, financial pressure, the accumulated weight of circumstances outside your control. During these periods, the all-or-nothing mindset kills more progress than any external obstacle. If I can't do it properly, I won't do it at all. This sounds like high standards. It is actually the most reliable path to abandoning the pursuit entirely. Because once you've broken the streak, once you've given yourself permission to stop completely, restarting is a much larger psychological lift than continuing would have been. Minimum viable persistence means identifying the smallest possible action that keeps you moving forward when full execution isn't available. Not as your permanent standard, but as your floor during difficult periods. One push-up instead of a full workout. One paragraph instead of a full writing session. 1 minute of meditation instead of 20. One phone call instead of a full day of outreach. The specific action matters far less than maintaining the psychological identity of someone who is still in motion, someone who is still showing up in some form, someone who has not decided to stop. Because here's what minimum viable persistence protects that's more valuable than any single session of output: your identity as someone who doesn't quit. Every day you show up, even minimally, even imperfectly, you cast another vote for that identity. And that identity, once solidified through consistent evidence, becomes its own source of persistence. You don't just do the work because it's important. You do it because stopping would contradict who you are. That is a form of motivation that external rewards and results can never consistently provide. Advanced mental programming, dismantling your hidden ceilings. You've built the behavioral systems. You've developed the execution habits. You've trained your focus and your resilience, and you're maintaining persistence through difficulty. But there's one more layer, the deepest one, that determines the ultimate ceiling of what you're capable of achieving. Your subconscious beliefs about yourself and what's possible for someone like you. These are not the obvious limitations you can see and consciously address. These are the invisible ones, the deeply grooved assumptions that were installed in your operating system years or decades ago, often through experiences you've long since stopped consciously thinking about. They operate below awareness. They shape behavior without your knowledge. And they are extraordinarily effective at keeping you exactly where you are, even when every conscious part of you is working hard to get somewhere different. You might work incredibly hard and still hit the same ceiling repeatedly. You might achieve a certain level and then mysteriously self-sabotage just as you're approaching the next tier. You might set the same goal multiple times, make significant progress, and then somehow end up back where you started. This is not weakness. This is not lack of effort. This is subconscious programming protecting a belief system that was installed long before you had the wisdom or agency to examine it. The most common hidden limitations sound like this in their internal form. People from my background don't achieve that kind of success. Or, I'm not naturally disciplined, that's just who I am. Or, success at that level requires connections and advantages I don't have. Or, I've never been able to maintain this before. What's different now? These beliefs don't announce themselves. They masquerade as realistic self-assessment. They wear the costume of humility and pragmatism. But underneath, they are simply old programming, installed through early experiences, social conditioning, repeated patterns, and the accumulated weight of times things didn't work out the way you hoped. And they can be changed, not easily, not overnight, but systematically and permanently. Identity reprogramming, acting, your way into a new self-image. The most direct route to dismantling subconscious limitations is the same principle we discussed earlier in the context of habits, but applied at a deeper, more fundamental level. You cannot think your way into a new identity. You act your way into it. Affirmations without corresponding behavior change nothing at the subconscious level. Your brain is not convinced by what you say to yourself in the mirror. It's convinced by what you do, consistently, repeatedly, in alignment with the identity you're claiming, until the evidence becomes undeniable. The process works like this. First, identify the specific limiting belief that's creating the ceiling. Be precise. Not "I have low self-esteem," but "I believe that people in my professional field who achieve executive-level success have advantages and networks that I don't have access to." Specificity is essential because you can't dismantle something you haven't clearly identified. Second, identify the behavior that someone who doesn't hold that belief would exhibit. If you genuinely didn't believe you lacked the necessary access or advantages, what would you do that you're not currently doing? Who would you reach out to? What opportunities would you pursue? What risks would you take? Third, and this is the critical step, do those things now, before you feel ready, before the belief has changed. Act as if the limiting belief were already dismantled, even when it isn't, especially when it isn't. Every time you act in contradiction to your limiting belief, you generate a piece of evidence that challenges it. Your brain takes note. The certainty with which it holds the old belief weakens slightly. The space for a new belief opens fractionally. Repeat this enough times, with enough consistency and enough genuine commitment, and the old belief loses its authority. Not through argument or affirmation, but through the accumulated weight of behavioral evidence that contradicts it. This is identity reprogramming, and it is the deepest, most durable form of personal change available to you. The relationship with failure, from threat to fuel, the final subconscious pattern that limits most people's performance, particularly at higher levels of ambition, is their relationship with failure. Most people have been conditioned through years of educational systems and social feedback to interpret failure as evidence of inadequacy. Getting something wrong means something is wrong with you. Falling short of a goal means you're not capable of achieving it. Failing publicly means others now have evidence of your limitations. This conditioning creates an invisible but extraordinarily powerful brake on performance. Because if failure is a threat to your identity, if it means something fundamental about your worth or capability, then the rational response is to avoid situations where failure is possible. And avoiding situations where failure is possible means avoiding situations where meaningful growth is possible, which means you spend your life optimizing for safety, while the version of yourself you're capable of becoming waits patiently on the other side of risks you never take. Anti-fragility is the concept that flips this completely. An anti-fragile system doesn't just tolerate stress and setback, it gets stronger because of it. Each failure doesn't just leave you where you were. It leaves you more capable, more informed, and more equipped for the next attempt than you were before. This is not a metaphor. This is literally how your neural architecture works when you choose to learn from failure rather than be defined by it. When you encounter a genuine setback, a significant one, the kind that stings, the questions that determine whether it makes you stronger or just leaves a mark are these. What specific capability did this experience reveal that I need to develop? What did I learn about the gap between my current approach and what this challenge actually requires? How does navigating this difficulty, even imperfectly, change what I'm capable of handling next time? These questions redirect the energy of disappointment toward development. They make failure productive. They transform your relationship with setback from threat to curriculum. Over time, this shift changes not just how you respond to failure, but how you approach risk. When failure is information rather than verdict, risk-taking becomes rational rather than threatening. You pursue bigger goals, take on harder challenges, and attempt things that matter, because you know that whatever happens, you'll extract something of value from the experience. Complete transformation, becoming someone different, not just doing things differently. Everything in this journey has been building towards something that goes beyond behavior change. Behavior change is fragile. It depends on environment, motivation, circumstances, and continuous effort. The person who changes their behavior without changing their identity will maintain those behaviors only as long as external conditions support them, and will revert the moment conditions change. Complete transformation means becoming a fundamentally different person, someone for whom the hard things are simply what they do, because of who they are. This is not a gradual drift into a slightly better version of your current self. This is a deliberate, chosen break with the operating system that has been running your life, and the construction of a new one that serves you completely. It happens in distinct stages. The first stage is what I call the breaking point, the moment where you achieve complete, unambiguous clarity about what remaining the same is costing you. Not vague dissatisfaction, precise, unflinching accounting. What specifically are you missing? In your health, your career, your relationships, your sense of self? Because of the patterns you've been unwilling to change. What is the likely trajectory of your life if nothing fundamentally shifts? What is the compounding cost of another year, another 5 years, another decade of the same patterns? When you sit with these questions honestly, without defense, without rationalization, without the comfortable vagueness that allows you to acknowledge a problem without truly reckoning with it, something shifts. The pain of staying the same becomes sharper than the pain of changing. At this point, change stops being something you're trying to do and becomes something you must do. Your old patterns stop feeling comfortable and start feeling intolerable. Your excuses stop feeling reasonable and start feeling like the specific things they are, the mechanisms by which you've been choosing a smaller life than you're capable of. This is not a comfortable moment, but it is the most important one in any genuine transformation. Identity integration. Acting new before feeling new. The second stage is the most challenging and the most commonly abandoned phase of transformation. You've broken with your old identity. You've chosen a new one, but you don't feel like that new person yet. The new behaviors feel forced, unnatural, effortful. The old patterns are still grooved deep, and they pull constantly. The gap between who you've decided to become and who you currently feel like is wide and uncomfortable. This is the stage where most transformations fail, not because people go back to their old behaviors, but because they wait to feel like the new person before acting like them. But the feeling follows the action. It never precedes it. You will not feel like someone who does hard things consistently until you have done hard things consistently long enough for your brain to update its self-image based on the evidence. This means you must act in alignment with your new identity, especially when it feels completely unnatural, especially when the old patterns feel more honest, especially when your emotional state is arguing loudly that you're not really this person. Every single time you act in accordance with your chosen identity, despite how you feel, you accomplish two things simultaneously. You produce the external result, the workout completed, the project advanced, the difficult conversation had, the commitment honored, and you produce the internal evidence, the neural data point that your brain files under who I am, that gradually, accumulating over days and weeks and months, updates your subconscious self-image from the person you were to the person you're becoming. This process requires what might be the most important quality in any genuine transformation: behavioral integrity. Doing what you said you would do, when you said you would do it, regardless of how you feel in the moment. Not because feelings are unimportant, but because your identity is built from your actions, not from your intentions, not from your aspirations, not from how you feel on any given day. Every day of behavioral integrity is a day of identity construction, automatic excellence. When hard things stop feeling hard, there is a stage of development that most people never reach, not because it's inaccessible, but because they stop before they get there. It's the stage where the hard things stop requiring effort, not because they've become easy in any objective sense, but because your identity as someone who does them has become so completely integrated that doing them is simply an expression of who you are, and not doing them would feel like the abnormal, uncomfortable choice. You don't negotiate with yourself about whether to show up. You don't need to manufacture motivation before starting. You don't require ideal conditions or peak energy or a perfect mood. You just do it because that's what you do, because that's who you are. This is automatic excellence, and it is available to you. Not as a distant theoretical possibility, but as a concrete developmental stage that follows naturally from consistent application of everything we've covered. The timeline varies. For some behaviors in some people, this stage arrives in weeks. For deeper, more identity-threatening changes, it might take months or years. But the process is reliable, the mechanism is consistent, and the destination, a version of yourself for whom hard things are simply the default, is real. When you reach this stage, something else becomes available that wasn't before: exponential growth. Because when your brain is no longer fighting against your goals, when your automatic behaviors are aligned with your ambitions rather than working against them, the cognitive and emotional energy that was previously consumed by internal resistance becomes available for performance and development. You're no longer spending the majority of your mental resources on willpower and motivation management. Those resources are freed for actual capability, development, for deeper focus, for better decisions, for higher quality work and more meaningful relationships, and bolder moves in every direction that matters. The compound returns of transformation become visible, and then they become extraordinary. The choice at the end of every chapter. We've covered everything. The neuroscience of why your brain resists hard things, the systematic dismantling of willpower dependency, the force system that makes right behaviors automatic, environmental programming that designs your world for execution, mental leverage techniques that multiply your psychological power, the execution engine that produces action regardless of motivation, deep focus training that unlocks your cognitive ceiling, habit architecture that programs automatic success, mental resilience that keeps you functional under genuine pressure, persistence protocols that carry you through the moments before breakthrough, advanced programming that dismantles your hidden limitations, and complete transformation that makes hard things simply who you are. This is not a collection of interesting ideas. This is a complete operating manual for the most important machine you will ever work with, your own mind. But here's the truth that no book, no framework, no system can change. None of this produces anything without a decision. Not the decision to try these ideas when you feel motivated. Not the decision to implement them when conditions are convenient. Not the decision to give them a reasonable effort and see how it goes. The decision to commit completely to becoming a different person. To accept, without negotiation, that who you've been is no longer who you're going to be. To treat the gap between your current self and your capable self not as a comfortable place to live, but as a problem that demands immediate and sustained resolution. This decision is yours to make, right now, not tomorrow morning, not after this chapter settles in, not when the timing feels better, right now, because your brain is waiting for clear instructions. And the instructions it's been operating on, the ones that have been producing your current results, are about to be replaced. The only question remaining is the one this entire journey started with. Will you force your brain to do hard things? Not because it's comfortable, not because it feels natural, not because motivation is high and conditions are perfect, but because everything you actually want, the health, the career, the relationships, the sense of self, the life that reflects what you're genuinely capable of, is on the other side of hard things. And now, finally, you know exactly how to get there.